ever just get, like, completely stuck on a problem?
Mhm.
Like, you could throw everything at it, equations, algorithms, maybe even one of those supercomputers you hear about, and it's still a no-go.
I see where you're going with this.
Well, what if I told you that feeling of impossibility, it might not just be in our heads, but, like, baked into the universe itself,
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
woven into, like, the very fabric of logic and math?
Now you've got my attention.
Get ready to stretch your brains, everyone, because today we're diving deep into the limits of what we can actually know.
This is going to be fun.
And we've got some serious brain power guiding us. Gödel and Turing.
Those are some big names.
Right. We're talking about the kind of ideas that make your head spin, but in a good way, hopefully.
Well, we'll try our best to make sense of it all.
Our source material this time is a lecture by Scott Aronson called Gödel, Turing, and Friends, which, side note, sounds like the best band ever.
Catchy.
Anyway, he gets pretty deep into the weeds. It is a lecture, after all.
Right.
But our goal here is to break it down, bring those mind-blowing ideas back to earth.
That sounds good to me.
So we're talking about those bedrock theorems, the ones they teach in all the computer science classes.
The classics.
But what do they actually mean? Like, why should anyone care besides mathematicians and, I don't know, philosophers?
And maybe the occasional podcast host.
Hey, we have deep thoughts too.
Of course, of course.
But seriously, if you've ever used a computer, thought about infinity, or just wondered if there's an edge to what we can understand.
This deep dive is for you.
All right, so Aronson jumps right in, talking about all these complex logical rules.
Right. Those rules, even physicists get tripped up on those sometimes.
Oh, I believe it. It's like trying to follow a recipe in a foreign language. The basic idea, but the details get lost in translation.
Exactly. But those rules, they're like the fundamental ingredients of any mathematical proof.
Maybe building blocks, kind of?
Think of it this way. Each rule is like a tiny logical step. And if you put enough of those steps together, you can build a skyscraper.
A skyscraper of math.
Exactly. And that's essentially what Gödel's Completeness Theorem tells us. With enough of those logical blocks, you can build any mathematical truth, any logical skyscraper you can imagine.
So you're saying ultimate proof, like the answer to everything, it's out there, just waiting for us to assemble it, block by logical block.
In a way, yes. It's a very elegant idea.
It does sound kind of optimistic, right?
It does, until Gödel throws us a curveball, that is.
Oh, here it comes.
Enter the Incompleteness Theorem.
Which basically says
That even with all the right logical blocks, there are going to be some mathematical truth you simply can't build, can't prove within that system.
okay, wait, hold on.
Yeah,
You're saying there's truth out there, but we can't prove it.
that's the gist of it, yes.
How does that even work?
It's definitely counterintuitive.
Mm.
The key thing to remember is this. Gödel's Incompleteness Theorem applies to systems that are both consistent and computable.
Okay, hold on. Back up a bit. What did those words mean again? I'm still stuck on the whole unprovable truth thing.
Right, sorry. Consistent just means you can't prove a contradiction within the system. Like you can't prove that 2 plus 2 equals 4 and that 2 plus 2 equals 5 at the same time.
Okay, that makes sense. What about computable?
Computable means there's a systematic way to generate all the theorems within that system, like a set of rules you could, in theory, program into a computer.
So our usual system of arithmetic, adding numbers and whatnot that fits the bill.
Exactly. Which means there are true statements about numbers, maybe even simple ones, that we'll never be able to prove using just the rules of arithmetic.
Okay, that is just wild. It's like, what? There's a secret level of math we can't even access.
It's a bit like having all the pieces of a puzzle, but realizing some of them are invisible.
You know they're there, they have to be, but you can't actually work with them.
A very good analogy.
Okay, so that's Gödel in a nutshell. Mind officially blown.
We're just getting started.
Wait, there's more,
Oh, yeah. Now, where does Turing fit into all of this?
right? I almost forgot about him. He's the computer guy, right?
That's right. And his work is deeply, deeply connected to these limits of logic we've been talking about. See, around the same time Gödel was shaking things up, Turing was laying the foundation for, well, pretty much every computer we use today.
Hold on, Turing didn't invent the computer, did he?
Not exactly. It's more accurate to say he invented the idea of a computer.
The idea.
He came up with this concept of a Turing machine. It's more of a thought experiment than a physical device.
Okay, so, what is it?
Picture this. A really, really simplified computer. It's got this infinitely long tape divided into squares and this little head that moves back and forth. And this head, it can read and write symbols on the tape based on a set of instructions it's given.
Sounds simple enough.
Deceptively simple. You see, Turing wasn't interested in building an actual machine. He was interested in the idea of a universal computer, a machine that can, in theory, run any program you can imagine.
So, like the blueprint for all computers.
Exactly. And this theoretical machine, this Turing machine, allowed him to tackle one of the most fundamental problems in computer science,
Which is
the halting problem.
the halting part. Okay, now we're talking. Is that like when my laptop freezes and I have to do a hard reset? Because that's a problem I know all too well.
Kind of. But think bigger picture. The halting problem asks, can you create a program that can look at any other program and tell you if it will eventually stop running or if it will just loop forever?
Let me think about that for a second. So, like, you've got this one program that's basically a code detective. It looks at another program's code and figures out if it's going to behave itself or not.
That's a great way to put it.
So, I mean, it seems possible, right? Like, analyze the code, see what it's doing.
You'd think so. And programmers do this kind of thing all the time, right? Debugging code, finding those infinite loops.
Yeah, exactly.
But the halting problem isn't about analyzing one program at a time. It's about creating a universal debugger, a program that works on any program imaginable. And what Turing proved, and this is where things get really mind-blowing, is that such a program is impossible.
Impossible? How can you prove a program is impossible? It's not like trying to build a perpetual motion machine. You can't just test every possible program, can you?
You're right, it's not about testing every single program. It's about logic. It's about a very clever proof by contradiction.
Okay, so how does Turing go about proving that? A proof by contradiction, you said.
Exactly. It's a classic technique in logic and math. Turing said, okay, let's just pretend for a moment that we could create this magic program that solves the halting problem. Let's call it P for simplicity.
All right, so we've got this hypothetical program P, the halting problem solver.
Right. Now, here's where things get really interesting. We're going to create another program, P prime, that uses P in a sneaky way.
Oh boy, I'm already sensing a paradox coming on.
You got it. So P prime, it takes another program as input, just like P does.
Okay.
It feeds that input program to P, our halting problem solver.
So far, so good.
But then, and this is the crucial part, if P says the input program will eventually halt, stop running,
Yeah.
P prime does the opposite. It intentionally goes into an infinite loop. And if a P says the input program will loop forever, P prime does the opposite and halts immediately.
So it's like this mischievous little program that always does the opposite of what our halting problem solver tells it to do.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Now, are you ready for the really mind-bending part?
Hit me.
We feed P prime its own code as input.
Oh, okay. We're going full paradox here. It's like that time travel movie where you go back in time and accidentally prevent yourself from being born.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It creates this unsolvable logical loop. Think about it. If P prime is about to halt, because that's what it does, it either halts or loops, it means P, our halting problem solver, must have looked at P prime's code and said, yep, that program's going to loop forever.
Because that's what P prime does. It does the opposite of what P predicts.
Right. But then because P predicted an infinite loop, P prime does the opposite. It halts.
So it's like a self-fulfilling, or rather self-contradicting prophecy.
Perfect. And on the flip side, if P prime is about to go into an infinite loop, it means P must have said, nope, that program's going to halt eventually. But again, P prime does the opposite and loops forever. No matter what, we run into a contradiction, a paradox.
So you're saying it's logically impossible for this program, this P, to exist in the first place.
Exactly. Because if it did, it would lead to these impossible situations. And that, my friend, is the essence of a proof by contradiction.
Wow, okay. I think I need a moment to process this, so just to be sure I'm following. What Turing did was essentially show that there are some problems, some perfectly reasonable-sounding questions about computer programs, that no computer, no matter how powerful, could ever answer. It's not just about not having enough processing power or memory, it's a fundamental limit built into the very fabric of computation.
You've got it.
That is mind-blowing. But this is more than just some esoteric computer science puzzle, right? You said it ties back to Gödel and his whole unprovable truth thing.
Absolutely. You see, figuring out if a program halts or not, that's ultimately a mathematical question. And if we could solve the halting problem, we could, in a way, cheat our way past Gödel's Incompleteness Theorem.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, we could take those supposedly unprovable those truths that Gödel said we could never prove,
Right.
and we could encode them into programs. Then we run our trusty halting problem solver on them.
And boom, we'd have our answer.
Exactly. We could determine the truth or falsity of those statements, even though Gödel said they were beyond the reach of proof.
But because we can't solve the halting problem thanks to Turing's ingenious proof.
Those unprovable truths stay tantalizingly out of reach. It's almost poetic, isn't it?
It is kind of beautiful in a frustrating sort of way. Like Gödel and Turing, they were both looking at the same wall, this wall that separates what we can know from what we can't.
And they were shining a light on it from opposite sides, revealing these fundamental limits.
Okay, my brain is officially starting to hurt, but in a good way. So, the halting problem, are there other examples of these kinds of undecidable problems lurking out there in the world of math and computer science? Or is it just this one giving everyone a headache?
Oh, there are plenty more. Remember how you were asking earlier if there's an edge to what we can understand?
Yeah, like if there's a point where our brains, or even math itself, just kind of hits a wall.
Well, things get even weirder when we start talking about the infinite. And that's where things like the Axiom of Choice and the Continuum Hypothesis come into play.
The continuum. What? No. Okay, now you're just messing with me, right?
I wouldn't dream of it.
Yeah.
We're talking about different sizes of infinity, which I know sounds strange even to say out loud.
It does. Like, isn't infinity, by definition, infinite? Like, the biggest thing there is.
You'd think so. But even infinity has its layers, it seems.
Layers of infinity. Okay, now my brain is really starting to hurt.
Just wait, it gets better. The
Yeah?
Continuum Hypothesis, for instance, it asks whether there's an infinity that's bigger than, say, the set of all whole numbers.
You know, like 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Going on forever.
Right, exactly. But smaller than the set of all real numbers, which includes all the decimals and fractions in between.
So, like a medium-sized infinity.
You got it. And here's the really mind-blowing part. Mathematicians have actually proven that you can either accept this idea of a medium-sized infinity as true or false. And it won't break mathematics.
Wait, what? Hold on a second.
It's wild, right?
You're saying there are, like, different versions of math we can choose from, all perfectly logical and consistent?
It seems that way. You can build a whole mathematical universe where that medium infinity exists and another one where it doesn't.
Okay, I think I officially need to lie down after this. It's like, are we even talking about real infinity at this point, or just like symbols on a page? What's even real anymore?
Deep thoughts, right? It really makes you question the foundations of math and logic. And you know who else likes to mess with those foundations?
Yummy guess. Sky Aronson.
Well, yes, but more specifically, quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics, of course. Because why not throw a little more mind-bending weirdness into the mix, right?
Yeah.
But speaking of quantum stuff, it's all about these discrete chunks, right? These quanta. But then we also hear about wave functions and probabilities spread out over space. It's like, how can something be both chunky and smooth at the same time?
Yeah, it's one of the big mysteries, right? I think of it like this. Quantum mechanics, it walks this tightrope between the continuous and the discrete. We have these wave functions, and they describe the state of a particle, its possibilities.
Yeah.
And those functions are continuous, they're smooth, but when we actually go to measure something, when we try to pin down a particle's position, momentum, whatever.
We get a discrete answer.
Exactly. A specific value, not a smear of possibilities.
So it's almost like the map is not the territory. The math we use, it describes these continuous possibilities, but the reality we experience might be fundamentally different.
You're getting at something really profound there. And, you know, it's kind of reassuring when you think about all those infinity paradoxes we were struggling with earlier.
How so?
Well, those paradoxes, they often come up when we assume we can measure things with infinite precision, right?
Right.
Divide things into infinitely small pieces.
Yeah.
But in the quantum world, there's a limit to how precisely we can measure things. It's baked into the universe. So maybe those infinities, they're not actually a problem.
It's like the universe is saying, don't worry too much about those infinities. You can't actually get there anyway.
Exactly.
Well, that's a relief. I'm all for exploring the edges of what we can know, but there's something comforting about the universe having some boundaries built in. Although, speaking of pushing boundaries, Aronson leaves us with one final brain teaser, something called the busy beaver problem. Ever heard of it?
Oh, yes, the busy beaver. It's a
Yeah.
classic. It sounds adorable, right? But it leads to some really wild conclusions. Imagine you've got a Turing machine, right?
Okay, got it. Our little tape reading friend.
But this time, instead of asking if it will halt or not, we're curious about which programs run for the longest time before they finally halt.
So like a competition to find the most persistent, hardworking Turing machine out there.
Exactly. We're looking for those little overachiever programs, the ones that squeeze in as many computational steps as possible before they finally say, I'm done.
I'm picturing a little Turing machine just chugging away, determined to outwork all the others.
And the number of steps they take before halting, that's the busy beaver number.
Okay, there's got to be a catch, right? These busy beavers are up to something.
You're right to be suspicious. Here's the thing. This busy beaver function, it grows faster than any computable function. No matter how clever you are, you can't write a program to calculate those busy beaver numbers beyond a certain point.
Because they get too big, too fast.
Exactly. They quickly outpace anything our minds, or even our most powerful computers, can handle. It's another one of those limits we keep bumping up against. Only this time, it's not just about finding an answer, but about whether we can even describe the answer with our current mathematical tools.
So it's like the busy beaver. It's building this tower of knowledge, but the tower is growing so fast, so unimaginably tall that we can't even see the top, let alone reach it.
That's a great way to put it. It's humbling, isn't it, to think that there might be answers out there right there in front of us, but they're encoded in a language we don't yet understand.
It really makes you wonder what other seemingly simple questions might turn out to be impossible for computers to solve, not because they're too complicated, but because the very nature of the answer. It's just beyond our current understanding of computation. It's a good thing our brains aren't computers, right? We can still marvel at the mystery, even if we can't fully grasp it. Well, that was quite the deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the limits of logic, computation, and maybe even reality itself. Who knows, maybe one day we'll tackle those busy beavers for real. But until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember sometimes the most interesting answers are the ones we haven't even begun to imagine.